Welcome to today's public forum on militant Islam and Middle East turmoil, lessons from and implications for Southeast Asia. This is something that I think may be the first time in Thailand that we have had the pleasure and privilege of having top experts from the Middle East to speak here at July and in a public forum like this in Thailand. Before we begin, let me invite the Dean of the Faculty, Professor Ehud Tangsupvattana, to say a few welcoming remarks, and then we'll proceed.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the Faculty of Political Science, Chulalongkorn University, for today's public forum on militant Islam and Middle East turmoil. As you know, the Islamic State and Middle East politics and government have been in the news. Most spectacularly, we have recently witnessed the burning alive of a Jordanian pilot following the killing of 2 Japanese journalists and the growing radicalization and violence of Islamic State. Today, we have a special event in exceptional experts and on our panel this morning. I want to thank each of them, Professor David Menashri, Dr. Jonathan Spire, and Mr. Ehud Ya'ari from the Middle East, and Kun Kavi Jongkit Thawon, Mr. Ehud Ya'ari, and Jawhar Hassan from Southeast Asia. I'm pleased to inform you that this is the first time in Thailand that we have such distinguished lineup from the Middle East and Southeast Asia on the same panel to share their insights and expertise. The objective today is for the 2 regions, the Middle East and Southeast Asia, to learn from each other developments in the Middle East, particularly from the rise of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, can impinge on regional peace and stability in Southeast Asia as much as inputs from Southeast Asia have affected the Middle East. For example, in the past, we have seen foreign fighters from Southeast Asia joining militant Islamic movements in Middle East. When these fighters returned to their respective home country in Southeast Asia, they have posed security challenges to regional and local authority. How to handle these challenges of returned fighters from the Middle East is one of our aims here today. Overall, we are here to promote a dialogue and understanding between these 2 regions. Southeast Asia is the home of the largest Muslim country, namely Indonesia, and our region comprises a combined population of 620 million, which is more than half Muslim. We know too little about Middle East ongoing turmoil, its roots, its dynamics, and its direction. This is what we want to understand better today. In doing so, I want to thank and recognize Dr. Colin Robinson, an Australian academic who has been promoting this inter-regional dialogue towards peace and better understanding between Southeast Asia and Middle East. Please be aware that ISIS Thailand Public Forum always aim to be balanced and measured. If you have questions and comments, please keep them brief and to the point. Many thanks to the speaker and to all the participants for joining these forums. I now return the floor to Ajahn Titinan, our moderator for this morning. Thank you.
Just a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. This is an unusual panel. Normally we don't have a 6-member panel, but it's a special occasion and we want to learn a lot. So we have both Southeast Asia experts and Middle East experts. Outside the building, you will see a lot of commotion. We will finish at about 11:30. Please feel free to visit the Friday market. There's a market out. There's very good food, all kinds of things you can buy, souvenirs included. And nearby, we have, once every 3 years, we have a political science fair. So if you walk out the building, and on the right-hand side, there's a lot of student activities. They also have food for sale, and they have a bit of a merry-go-round and fun activities. So please feel free to join that as well. It'll be close to lunchtime, so it might be convenient. Now, I want to introduce the speakers before we proceed. It's really a pleasure to do something on something rather than Thai politics, and to focus on something that we see a lot here, a lot in the news, but it's alien to us. We don't have an intimate feel of the region, of the Middle East. We see the news and we take it as is. So today we are interested in gaining insights, depth, some deeper understanding beyond the headlines from our Middle East experts. At the same time, we also want to reflect and look at how events in the Middle East impinge or affect our region in Thailand, Southeast Asia. So we have experts from Southeast Asia here on the panel and also in the audience. Let me introduce them one by one quickly. I'm not going to go into their bios. You have their bios with you. But we have, our first speaker will be Dr. Jonathan Spire. He's an expert and he'll give us a good, concise context. I have heard him speak already yesterday, so I know he'll give us a very good understanding and a good overall overarching view of Iraq and Syria, especially Syria, what's happening there. And then Ehud Ya'ari, Mr. Ya'ari, is a prominent, foremost expert of Middle East affairs based in Israel. You know, he is quite a privilege for us to have him here. So he will then follow, and then Professor David Menashri will follow, and then we'll come down to Kun Kavi Jongkitawan, Mr. Endi Bayuni of Jakarta Post, Indonesia, a veteran journalist like Kun Kavi, veteran journalist, senior fellow with ISIS Thailand, and Tan Sri Jawhar, who is the chairman of New Straits Times of Malaysia, and he recently stepped down from being chairman of ISIS Malaysia. So, you know, we have ISIS Malaysia, ISIS Thailand. These are the real ISIS, you know, the ISIS that we see. Let's not call them ISIS even, IS or Daesh or whatever we want to call them. So let's proceed with Jonathan Spire. I think the speakers have up to 20 minutes. 15 would be great, but no more than 20.
First of all, I'd like to ask, can everybody see this map in the middle of the room? Hopefully you can, because it will be helpful for me if you can. What I want to try and do in the next 10 or 15 minutes is to look at what this map is, and to try to use it as an example of a way to understand what is happening in our region. First of all, as you can see, the map is a map of Syria. But to be more accurate, it is a map of a country which no longer exists. That is to say, it is a map of a country which has fragmented as a result of a 3-year civil war into a variety of different blocks or different areas or areas of control, to just understand where we're at. And again, I hope you can see the little arrow moving around here, which I'm making move around. These blocks are to be understood in the following ways. This area here in red, stretching from the southern coast through the capital Damascus and up to the western coastal area of Syria. This is the area of the country still controlled by the thing that calls itself the government of Syria, the regime of Bashar Assad. These small green areas here and here are the areas controlled by the Syrian rebels, the Sunni Arab rebels, the remnant of the thing which declared war on the Assad regime in mid-2011. This vast grey area here is the area controlled by Islamic State, Daesh, or ISIS, as I'm apparently not allowed to call them this morning. Their area stretches not only throughout this region we can see, but also eastwards across the border here into Iraq. And these yellow areas here, up here, this is Jazeera area, here is Afrin, little tiny button here is Kobani. These are the areas controlled by the Kurdish military forces in Syria. So we have here an example of a country which has fragmented. Let us first of all then understand how this fragmentation came about. You will recall the Arab Spring, the moment of great hope in early 2011 in our region. The Arab Spring came late to Syria. It began with an uprising in March 15th, 2011, an uprising of school children, first of all, in the south of Syria, in Daraa province. The regime attempted to crush this uprising in its own blood and failed to do so. And the uprising spread throughout the country, and the regime, effectively having instituted a series of very superficial reforms, effectively declared war on the uprising and sought to crush it from summer 2011 onwards. The result was predictable. The uprising began to arm itself, and by summer 2011, Syria was in a state of full-fledged civil war. The Assad regime had a problem from the start, and its problem was it did not have a sufficient number of men willing to take a bullet for it. And as a result, to cut the long story very short, in the summer of 2012, the Assad regime made a strategic decision to withdraw from a large part of the north of Syria. By doing so, the Assad regime effectively divided Syria up into component parts. 3 component parts: an area controlled by the regime itself, an area controlled by the rebellion, Sunni Arab rebellion against it, and an area controlled by the Kurds. This was in July 2012. Now, since then, the lines have moved considerably, but this basic situation has remained the same. That is to say, Syria has not reunited since July 2012. Of course, very importantly, there has come onto the scene in April 2013 a new organization, that organization being the Islamic State, or Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And this Islamic State, this grey area, has absorbed or swallowed up a large part of the territory of Syria that was once controlled by the rebellion. But having said that, the basic lines of fragmentation remain the same. Let's go through them once again. The regime here, the rebels, the green areas, grey, the Islamic State, and yellow, the Kurdish areas. Let me say a couple of words about each of these blocks before going on to try to draw some broader regional lessons from this situation. The Assad regime's problem has remained throughout one of manpower. As I said a moment ago, an absence of sufficient number of men willing to take a bullet for it. Nevertheless, it is still around. How has it managed to surmount this problem and stay alive? It has managed to surmount this problem because the Assad regime is fortunate in its choice of friends. It has good friends who have mobilized to look after it. Most important of these is the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Assad regime has been in official military alliance with the Iranians since 1982, since the first years, that is to say, of Islamic Republic of Iran. And when Assad got into trouble, the Iranians mobilized to help him. They understood he was short of men. They sent men to help him. Where did they send them from? They sent them from Lebanon to the west of Syria, and they sent them from the Hezbollah organization that dominates Lebanon, Shia Islamist organization that dominates Lebanon, to get involved. Also in fighting in Syria, and also in training up a brand new sectarian armed forces of around 30 to 40,000 men called National Defense Forces, which they put into the field in early 2013 to keep this regime going. So the regime has been fortunate in its choice of friends. As a result of this choice of friends, it is in existence in this truncated form which we can see here, and it is likely to remain in existence for the foreseeable future. Regarding the Sunni rebel areas, the Sunni rebels were much less fortunate in their choice of friends. Their choice of friends being the Sunni, powerful Sunni states of the region, the Saudis, the Qataris, of course the Turks also to the immediate north of Syria. The rebellion has been unfortunate in its, or notably deficient rather, in its ability to unite. It has remained a disparate collection of different military forces, some of them as small as a few hundred men, some of them as large as over 10,000, but none of them able to unite into a single bloc. This inability to unite and the crisscrossing, confusing network or networks of support have characterized this rebellion from the start, and it is one of the main reasons why the Islamic State, a very, very cruel and brutal but unified and centralized organization, has been able to swallow up so much of this rebel-controlled area. Nevertheless, the rebels remain in existence, and here in the southern front part of the country, where the Islamic State has not managed to penetrate, this rebellion nevertheless remains strong and is currently gaining ground against the red here, against the regime, with the hope at least of at some stage being able to move towards an offensive on the capital city of Damascus. So the rebellion truncated but remaining in existence. And lastly, but not least, the Kurdish areas, a non-Arab ethnic minority in Syria, which has managed to carve out for itself 3 enclaves in the north of the country, controlled by a Kurdish paramilitary organization called the PKK in its local iteration. A centralized area, a fairly peaceful area, and an area which is also set to survive for the foreseeable future. So this was the history of Syrian uprising in a nutshell, a country which has collapsed into separate blocks, each of the blocks different to the other, and each of the blocks supported by different regional countries or regional powers. What then, for the last couple of minutes, or for the last few minutes of this talk, can we understand from our region, from what is taking place in our region as a result, from this story, so to speak, from this reality of Syria? What can we generalize from this situation? First of all, we can generalize regarding the fragmentation of the state of Syria. Syria is not the only state that has fragmented, that is collapsing into separate components in our region in the course of the last 3 years. On the contrary, the fact of state fragmentation is taking place in not all states, but in a number of different countries across the region. To Syria's immediate east, for example, in Iraq, the state also is in a process of parallel, in many ways, fragmentation to that of Syria. It is separated off into 3 different blocks. Once again, the Kurds in the north, who, by the way, rule the area, contiguous area, going just east of this part of Syrian Kurdistan. In the middle, the Sunni Arabs, and to the south, the thing which still calls itself the government of Iraq, but which is in actual fact better understood as the Shia component of fragmented Iraq. So Iraq is fragmented. Yemen also is in the process of fragmentation. States with which we have lived in our region for the best part of 60 or 70 years currently have been reduced to expressions on a map, but no longer with any coherent political meaning to them. This is a matter of profound historical importance, which is still in the midst of its development, not yet concluded. So first of all, the matter of state fragmentation. Secondly, the issue of sectarianism can also be understood from this Syrian lesson, this lesson of Syria's breakup. Because Syria has not broken up merely randomly or according to simple questions of power, but rather each of these blocks effectively represents a separate one of Syria's many ethnicities. The Kurds, obviously a separate ethnic group, the Islamic State and the rebels representing the Sunni Arab majority of the country, and the regime area representing a kind of coalition of minority groups in the country. Of course, the Assad regime was dominated by the Alawis, but we can also include within this, broadly simplifying a bit, we can include within this bloc the fraying loyalty of Syria's Druze population, also to some degree the support or tacit support of the Christians as well. So sectarianism is in many ways the new language of politics emerging in our region as a result of the collapse of states, and not only the collapse physically of states, but also the collapse of the narratives that the states sought to tell as the basis of the identity they demanded from their citizens. That is to say, Syria once claimed the loyalty of its citizens on the basis of a shared secular Arab identity. This has now fallen apart, and it is sectarian identities which are rising to replace it, again, not only in Syria, but also in Iraq, of course also in Lebanon, which in any case was based on a sectarian power sharing, also in Yemen. Throughout the sectarian divides of the region, it is sectarian politics. Politics and military organizations formed along sectarian lines, which are coming to emerge as the successor entities to the collapsing states. And lastly, the issue of power blocks in the region, which are seeking to unite the various disparate forces under their own banner. And I'll just conclude by mentioning what I think are the three main power blocks currently battling in this region. And again, the Syrian map is a good exemplar for learning who these power blocks are, because the Assad regime, as I mentioned, benefited from its choice of friends, most importantly from its choice of friendship with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And the Islamic Republic of Iran stands at the head of a quite cohesive and coherent bloc of countries and movements in the region, including Hezbollah, of course, in Lebanon, Assad regime in Syria. I would argue also the government of Iraq. We are finding Palestinian Hamas today trying to find its way back to that bloc, a coherent, mainly Shia, not entirely Shia, but mainly Shia bloc led by Iran. This is bloc number one. Bloc number two, I would call a Sunni Islamist bloc, in which broadly we can say that the Syrian rebels belong, and in a different way, perhaps also Islamic State. And this is the bloc of movements and organizations based on a politics of Sunni Islamism, of Sunni political Islam, a far less united, far less cohesive area than that of the Shia-led bloc under Iran, but nevertheless a disparate, confused collection of different states and movements under that broad banner. And lastly, the third and not least important bloc, which is not really represented on this map, but it is the bloc of states which one might say the former and hopefully future allies of the United States in the region. That is to say, if we think of such countries as Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, but also, I would say also the Kurdish regional government of Barzani, but also the State of Israel as an adjunct and unstated member of this bloc. This alliance of countries with little ideologically to connect them, but which are opposed jointly both to the Iranians and their ambitions in the region and to Sunni Islamism. This broad, unstated bloc is also, I think, a powerful and important actor in the various contexts and the various states of the region. So to conclude, a couple of sentences. We're in the midst of a genuinely historic convulsion in our region at the moment. And this convulsion is characterized by the collapse of states, and along with it the collapse of assumptions which we have had about our region for the best part of the last half century and beyond it. We are in the midst of this convulsion. We don't know where it is, what the region is going to look like when it is ended, but it is going to look a great deal different to the region we have known for many years. We as Israelis seek first and foremost to navigate our own ship, so to speak, across these difficult waters, and there is much to discuss and much to learn. And I look forward to our discussion this morning as we try to tease out some of the broader issues. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Very clear and concise. So when we see news from this part of the world, from far away, it's traceable. We can look back to the Arab Spring as the basis for the rise of the Islamic State. From July 2012, basically the uprising in Syria has left the Syrian government still intact, backed by Iran. But then the insurgent groups, the leading one would be the Islamic State, and then there are others. So that's a big picture for us from July 2012 and the rise of Islamic State from April 2013. And we see their actions and activities on the news all the time. Let us proceed to Mr. Ehud Ya'ari.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure being in Thailand. Jonathan took you through a fascinating journey underground, mainly in Syria. I will try to fly at a higher altitude in a talk that I titled for myself, 10 points in less than 10 minutes. But first, a prologue. I think the emergence of the IS and AQ, Al-Qaeda is still there, of course, is indeed the product of the Arab Spring, which led to the collapse of a series of Arab states, which has completely obliterated the borders between some of the states. We don't have to stick to Syria. The border between Libya and Egypt does not effectively exist anymore. Many of the borders in the lands of the Sahel, North Africa, across the Sahara, are no longer there. No borders in Somalia, etc. So it's the collapse of states, obliteration of borders, melting away of some of the bigger military forces in the region. You saw 3 Iraqi divisions melt away in the process of 4 hours under attack by 1,500 rifle carriers, not much more than rifles, of IS in northern Iraq. 3 fully equipped, American-trained Iraqi divisions. And on top of the melting away of militaries, you have the weakening, dramatical process of the weakening of the security services which were in control of the different Arab countries until the Arab Spring. That's a picture of chaos. What has happened is the collapse of the unwritten social contract between the authoritarian rulers, whether they were kings or presidents or generals in power, and their subjects. Because Arabs, throughout their history, to their misfortune, were always merely subjects. The social contract was very simple. It stated that the authoritarian ruler will take care of the population, will provide basic services, education, Middle Eastern style medical services. In Egypt, you can study in the university beyond post-PhD without paying any tuition, etc., etc., etc. And in return, the subjects will provide the ruler with automatic support for whatever slogan, whatever policy he chooses to pursue. During the revolutions of the Arab Spring, and that's the big thing about it, the Arabs became, or were transformed in a way, from subjects to citizens. But here we had a problem. There is no legacy of citizenship. The new Arab citizen does not really know what is entailed in becoming a citizen. The new governments that emerged in different countries have no track record of dealing with citizens as different with dealing with subjects. And here comes IS and says, forget about citizenship. it's not what you really want. You want to become good, devout believers. And we will offer you our own interpretation of what does it mean to be a Muslim believer. And this is exactly the point, in my humble opinion, where we saw the emergence of IS as a major force. In brackets, what is the difference between Al-Qaeda historically and IS, which is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda? The difference is, basic difference is, that Al-Qaeda said, we will fight the enemy wherever. And there was a big debate in Al-Qaeda between Osama bin Laden, who said, let's fight the far enemy, 9/11, and between Ayman Zawahiri, the current leader, let's fight the near enemy, the Arab regimes. IS, which is the second generation of the Zarqawi operation in Iraq in the previous decade, IS is saying, no, we are not going after the enemy, whether it's the near enemy or the far enemy. We are establishing the caliphate, Islamic State. So please come here. Please join us in those black holes that were created in the Middle East. Come here. Do not necessarily go to target civilians or installations abroad. Now let me go, with your permission, through my 10 points. The first is, the most crucial battle raging today in the world, the most important divide on the global landscape, is the struggle to define Islam in the modern age. A clash between a forward-leaning, tolerant, enlightened reading of the holy texts and the enormous body of scholarly literature compiled over than a millennia, a clash between that and the medieval, fundamentalist, jihadist version offered by the likes of the IS, and in a different way by some of the Shiites, such as the Islamic Republic of Iran and its proxies, Hezbollah, for example, who seek a similar return to the sources and effectively restrict exercise of ijtihad. Ijtihad in Shiism is the right of the jurisprudent to innovate, to introduce new ruling, which are not necessarily based on past ruling. So they want to cancel it. Tony Blair, the ex-Prime Minister of England, is, in my opinion, absolutely on the ball in his diagnosis of this intra-Muslim confrontation as the main challenge of our century now. It is a clash between Islam as a guide to life and Islam as a ritual of death, urging martyrdom, no less. Second, this battle should be conducted, first of all, by Muslims themselves, rejecting Salafi and Khomeinist theories. We can easily detect some inclination in this direction of Muslims taking a stand against it, as demonstrated, for example, lately by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in Egypt during his latest speech at Al-Azhar University, the most important Islamic scholarly institution in the world. He said to the ulama, to the Muslim scholars in Al-Azhar. He said to them, how come that the whole world has come to see Islam as a menace? It cannot go on like this. You, the scholars, have to do something about it. And the next thing he did is something that IS would never do. He was the first ever Egyptian president to pray in the Coptic Christian Cathedral of Cairo. That was very symbolic. And there are other examples of Muslims taking very clear-cut stand against the doctrine of IS, as represented amongst the Palestinians, for example, by the movement which calls itself Wasatiyya, the middle road, led by my friend Professor Mohamed, whose car was torched in Jerusalem 3 weeks ago. But so far, these efforts are not loud enough and not orchestrated enough, in my view. 3, although many are willing to take part militarily in the campaign against IS, one has to accept that this is, above all, a war to be waged on the ideological and intellectual level. Jihadism may be defeated not just in combat, but mainly in the mosques and within the education system. Scholars and religious personalities must spearhead this effort. It cannot be left to generals and pilots. 4, the main impediment to successfully confront extremism is the lack so far of a cohesive, coherent, and comprehensive argument to demolish the foundations of the vast body of literature created since Ibn Taymiyyah, a Muslim scholar of the 13th century who witnessed the fall of Baghdad, capital of the Caliphate, to the Mongols, and drew extremist conclusions from that, from his experience, up to Sayyid Qutb, that's the Egyptian Muslim brother, philosopher, who wrote the famous book on the duty of jihad. The Missing Duty is the name of the book. He said jihad is not an appendix to the other duties of a good Muslim. It's the main one. And everybody that we see today, IS, Al-Qaeda, etc., they are all disciples of Mr. Qutb, who, by the way, was hanged by the Egyptians, President Nasser, in his time. One has to answer every single claim made by these thinkers, Ibn Taymiyyah, Sayyid Qutb, and the others. Refute them one by one. And it's only Muslims who can do it. 5, as long as the preachers of intolerant, hateful interpretation of Islam are able to gain ground amongst young Arabs and other Muslims, the rest of the world will suffer the consequences reflected in the spread of jihadism, breeding terrorism. This is true not only for Europe or America, but also for Asia and Southeast Asia, as we can all see in many places, from the Uyghurs in China, the Central Asian republics, the Caucasus, which has its own rebellion and has declared itself as one of the provinces of IS, Pakistan, which is going into pieces, Philippines, southern Thailand, as you know better than me, and elsewhere. Great projects like the new Silk Road of the Chinese president will be threatened and sabotaged by jihadists in control over vast stretches of land in the Euphrates and Tigris valleys, Syria and Iraq, the Sinai Peninsula, which is a no man's land now, 3 times bigger than the state of Israel, the Sahel, as I mentioned before, and Somalia in the Horn of Africa. 6, Iran and its militias, formidable militias, in Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, or Syria, cannot be regarded as a trustworthy ally against Sunni Salafi jihadism, because Iran is offering merely its own version, a Shiite version of the same extremist, warlike reading of Islam. You cannot win the war on terror with terror sponsors. You cannot. You cannot defeat people who issue fatwas, religious rulings, allowing burning alive people, like IS did in the past few days, with those people, the Iranians and their proxies, who introduced the tactics of suicide bombing. It doesn't work. 7, at the end of the day, it was and is the Muslim Brotherhood which serves as the incubator for jihadism. President Obama's view of the Muslim Brotherhood as moderate Islamists. I'm recalling here his 2009 speech in Cairo. His view was unfounded. Even the Arab Gulf states and others now realize this danger. Note also the ideological links between the Muslim Brotherhood, the incubator, and Khomeinism, to the point that the supreme leader of Iran, Khamenei, himself was the one translating into Persian Muslim Brotherhood books. Anybody who will tell you that the divide between Shiites and Sunnis is unbridgeable, if you take it from me, is misleading you. It is bridgeable. 8, the great Muslim nations of Asia, with their own moderate Islamic movements, Indonesia, Muhammadiyah, NU, etc., should get more involved in the Middle East, offering Asian schools of thought in order to help shape the debate going on amongst the Arabs. If you do not come to the Middle East will visit you. 9, the effort, in my opinion, should be collective, systematic, and coordinated through a broad front of Muslim countries and Muslim communities in other countries, such as Europe. And my final point number 10. Although the main battleground is the war of ideas, in the short term, military success against IS is indispensable. Such outcome will not be possible at the current level of military investment. If I may, I'll give you an example. An American pilot flying over Syria, which Jonathan, my friend, has showed you. When he identifies an IS target, he is not allowed to bomb. He has to call the operations room in CENTCOM, the American command, and they in turn have to communicate with the White House to get permission to shoot. By that time, the target is gone. This is not a way to win a war. And you cannot uproot IS from the Tigris and Euphrates valleys or other places by limited air campaign. Egypt has committed, with Israel's consent, we have basically modified the terms of the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty, Egypt is now deploying roughly a mechanized division with Air Force in the Sinai to fight the local franchise of IS, which used to be called Ansar Bait al-Maqdis, underground. And they are doing quite well, suffering losses, but doing quite well. The same is true for the Fertile Crescent, Iraq and Syria. And what is called for in order to defeat the IS is no more than 30,000 or so boots underground. No more. To dismantle the IS institutions and turn it again into one more terrorist organization, which in the future can be dealt with. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ya'ari. We'll come back to you, I'm sure, given what you've said. I just want to point out, you keep referring to the borders that no longer work, no longer recognized. So this goes back to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, right? So the Arab Spring has basically unraveled the borders from 100 years ago, agreed between the French and the British to carve up the area. Professor Menashri.